There are moments in life when the world feels thin. Most people ignore those moments. They feel the shiver, the brief sense that something unseen has passed close by, and they dismiss it as imagination. A trick of fatigue, a shadow moving where it should not, a sound in the dark that has no clear source. Human beings are very good at ignoring things that make them uncomfortable. That is how the world stayed hidden for so long. Dr. Marcus Vale first noticed it on a cold night in November. He worked alone in the lower archives of the North American Geological Survey, a building that had been expanded downward over the decades until its deepest floors rested nearly 40 meters beneath the city. Down there, time behaved strangely. The fluorescent lights hummed in long, steady notes. Air vents breathed softly through narrow ducts in the ceiling. The outside world, cars, voices, weather, sunlight, felt impossibly distant. Marcus liked it that way. He preferred silence to people. On that night, he was cataloging a set of unusual mineral samples recovered from a drilling project in northern Alaska. The samples had come from depths no human structure had ever reached before, 8 kilometers below the frozen surface. The drill operators had reported something strange. At first they thought it was just another mineral vein, but the rock formations were wrong. The layers were smooth where they should have been jagged, and inside some of the stone were shapes that looked disturbingly deliberate. Marcus held one of the fragments beneath the bright desk lamp. The stone had been cut. Not cracked, not broken, cut. Perfectly smooth surfaces intersected at angles that suggested design rather than geology. And there were marks etched into it. Thin grooves, repeating patterns, precise enough that they might once have meant something. A language, perhaps. Marcus leaned closer, his breath slowed. The grooves curved in ways that reminded him of scales. The lights flickered. Just once. A quick blink of darkness. Marcus frowned and glanced toward the ceiling. The humming returned to its normal pitch, but something about the room felt different. He sat very still. Sometimes silence can have weight. And suddenly the silence felt heavy. He turned slowly toward the far end of the archive room. Rows of metal shelving stretched into shadow, filled with crates of stone samples gathered from every continent on Earth. The aisles formed narrow corridors of darkness where the overhead lights did not quite reach. For a moment he thought he saw movement, something tall between the shelves. But when he focused on it, nothing was there. He told himself it was fatigue. It had been a long week. Still, he could not shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He returned his attention to the stone fragment. The grooves were arranged in repeating shapes, long curves intersected by triangular impressions. They looked almost organic, like something alive had once pressed its body into the rock while it was still soft. Marcus turned the sample over. That was when he noticed the second layer. The outer surface of the stone had cracked slightly during extraction. Beneath it was another material, darker and smoother. Metal. Marcus stared at it in disbelief. Metal did not form naturally inside rock this old. The geological dating placed the surrounding formation at over 200 million years. He reached for a tool and gently brushed away the remaining stone dust. The metal surface underneath was perfectly preserved, not corroded, not weathered, untouched by time. And engraved into that metal surface was a symbol, a single shape, an eye, but not a human eye. The pupil was vertical, like a serpent. The lights flickered again. This time they went out completely. Darkness swallowed the archive room. Marcus froze. For a moment the building was utterly silent. Then he heard something behind him, a slow movement, heavy, deliberate. Not the quick skitter of a rat or the shifting creak of metal shelves. This was something large, something breathing. Marcus turned slowly in his chair. He could see almost nothing in the darkness, except 2 points of faint amber light. Eyes. They watched him from the aisle between the shelves, unblinking, ancient, patient. Marcus felt something cold slide through his chest. The shape stepped forward slightly, just enough for the dim emergency lighting to touch its face. What he saw made his mind struggle to understand. The creature was tall, easily 2 meters, its body thick and powerful beneath dark, scaled skin. Its head was broad and heavy, with ridges above the eyes, and a mouth that curved into something disturbingly close to a human expression. Not anger, not hunger. Something else. Recognition. As though it had been expecting him. For a long time neither of them moved. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice would not come. The creature studied him calmly. Its eyes were ancient amber pools that reflected the faint emergency lights. Then it tilted its head slightly, examining Marcus the way a scientist might observe a specimen. When it finally spoke, the voice was deep and controlled, with a strange resonance that seemed older than language. "You were not meant to find that." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The creature's gaze shifted briefly to the stone fragment on the table. The symbol of the serpent eye glowed faintly in the dim light. Then the creature looked back at Marcus. And for the first time in human history, the rulers of the hidden world spoke openly to one of the surface species. Its voice was quiet, almost gentle. "We have lived beneath your world," it said, "since before your kind learned to stand upright." Marcus could not breathe. The creature took one slow step closer. "And now," it continued softly, "you have opened a door that has been closed for a very long time." The emergency lights flickered again. For a brief second the room plunged back into darkness, and when the lights returned, the creature was gone. But the stone fragment on Marcus's desk was no longer there. Marcus Vale would spend the rest of his life trying to prove that moment had really happened. But by the time he understood the truth, it would already be too late, because far below the surface of the earth, in vast cities carved into ancient stone, something had begun to wake, and for the first time in thousands of years, the reptilian dominion was preparing to rise again. There are places on Earth where time still moves slowly, high valleys where rivers wander through open meadows, forests that grow thick and quiet beneath towering mountains, places where the wind moves across stone that has not changed in 1,000 years. Humans believe those places are empty. That belief has always been convenient. Far above the valley, hidden behind a wall of broken limestone cliffs, a cave opened into the mountain like a wound that had healed long ago. From the outside it appeared ordinary, a dark hollow framed by jagged stalactites, cold air drifting slowly from the earth, nothing that would attract the attention of hikers or satellite surveys. But the cave did not belong to the mountain. It belonged to something much older. Standing in the mouth of that cave was a figure that would have shattered every accepted idea about life on Earth. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall. Its body was broad and heavily muscled, the skin dark and textured with thick scales that caught the dim light of the valley below. The arms were long and powerful, The shoulders carried the heavy strength of a predator, evolved in a world far less forgiving than the modern one. And its head turned slowly as it surveyed the valley below. Amber eyes watched the distant forests, watched the winding river, watched the scattered signs of human civilization miles away. From this height, the towns looked small, fragile, temporary. The creature stood very still. Its breathing was slow and controlled, the chest rising and falling with quiet patience. It had stood in this cave many times before, for centuries. His name, translated imperfectly into human language, would have been something like Kareth. Among his own kind, however, names were rarely spoken aloud. Identity was understood through memory, lineage, and position within the Dominion. Kareth was an observer, one of many who had spent generations watching the surface world. He had watched forests grow and burn. He had watched rivers shift their courses across centuries. He had watched human tribes become cities, cities become nations, and nations become machines. For a very long time, humanity had been a curiosity, an unpredictable but ultimately harmless species living on the thin skin of the planet. But recently, things had begun to change. Kareth's gaze drifted toward the distant valley town. Even from miles away, he could see the faint movements of vehicles along a highway that cut through the forest. Tiny lights, moving in organized patterns. Human beings had grown very skilled at building systems, electric grids, communication networks, orbiting satellites, all of it spreading across the surface like glowing threads. A nervous system, a planetary mind slowly assembling itself. Kareth did not fear it, but he respected it, because systems could grow powerful, and powerful systems sometimes asked dangerous questions. Behind him, deep within the cave, the darkness shifted. Another figure emerged slowly from the shadows. This one was older. The scales along his neck were darker and heavier, the ridges above the eyes thicker with age. His movements carried the calm certainty of something that had lived far longer than the civilizations below. He stepped beside Kareth and looked out over the valley. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the older one said quietly, "The human scientist has seen you." Kareth did not turn. Yes, the archives confirmed it. A long pause passed. The wind moved softly through the cave entrance. Far below, clouds drifted slowly through the valley. The older reptilian watched the distant world with steady eyes. This has not happened for many centuries. Kareth remained calm. He discovered a fragment of the old architecture. The sealed structures were never meant to be reached. They drilled deeper than expected. Silence returned again. The older reptilian considered this. Humans are accelerating. Kareth nodded slightly. Yes. The Dominion had always understood something about younger species. Given enough time, intelligence always reached a moment of awakening, a moment when curiosity became dangerous, when the species began asking questions about its origins, about the shape of the world, about what might exist beneath its feet. For tens of thousands of years, humanity had been safely below that threshold. But now they were digging deeper, mapping the oceans, scanning the crust of the planet with instruments that could see through rock. Sooner or later, the hidden cities would be discovered. And once humans began asking those questions, they would not stop. The older reptilian spoke again. "The council has already convened." Kareth finally turned his head. That was unexpected. The council only gathered when the balance between the surface world and the Dominion was threatened. "What have they decided?" Kareth asked. The older reptilian looked back toward the valley. "The time of passive observation may be ending." Kareth said nothing. For thousands of years, the Dominion had maintained one rule. The surface species must develop naturally. Interference was forbidden. Humans were not to know the Dominion existed, but now a human had already seen one of them. And worse, he had found evidence of the ancient structures buried beneath the crust. The first crack had appeared in the wall of secrecy, and cracks had a way of spreading. Kareth watched a thin line of fog drift through the valley. Humans would wake soon in the town below. They would drink coffee, drive to work, turn on their machines. They would live their lives believing the world belonged entirely to them. They had no idea how many civilizations had risen and fallen beneath their feet. How many cities slept in the deep stone. How many watchers stood silently in the mountains. The older reptilian finally spoke the words that would change everything. "The Council has authorized preparation." Kareth felt the weight of that statement. Preparation meant awakening systems that had been dormant for thousands of years. Cities buried deep beneath the crust. Technologies that predated human civilization. Defensive structures designed for a very different age of war. All of it waiting in the darkness. Waiting for the moment the Dominion might need to reveal itself again. Kareth looked back across the valley. The rising sun was beginning to touch the mountains in the distance. Gold light crept slowly across the forests. It was a beautiful world. Fragile, young, unaware. He wondered briefly if humanity would survive what was coming. Then he spoke the question that had begun to trouble even the Dominion. "If the humans learn the truth," Kareth asked quietly, "will they fear us or try to destroy us?" The older reptilian watched the waking world below. For a long time he said nothing. Then he answered with a calm certainty that came from watching civilizations for thousands of years. "They will do both." Far below the mountains, in a quiet city archive building, Dr. Marcus Vale was already searching for answers. And beneath the planet's surface, ancient machines were beginning to wake. Deep beneath the crust of the earth, far below the oldest human cities, there are places where light has never touched stone. There are caverns older than mountains, vast chambers carved not by erosion or pressure, but by intelligence. The Dominion built them long before the surface world belonged to mammals, long before humans, long before memory. In one of those chambers, a single eye opened, slowly. The eyelid lifted with a deliberate calm that suggested immense patience rather than sleep. The surface of the eye shimmered with molten amber light, its pupil a perfect vertical slit, sharp and ancient, like the eyes of the first predators that ever walked the earth. Around the eye, thick scales folded and shifted as the creature adjusted its position. Each scale carried the texture of age, not years, centuries. The creature did not rush. Dominion physiology did not require haste. Their kind had evolved under conditions where survival favored patience over speed, calculation over reaction. When the eye opened fully, it reflected the faint glow of the chamber around it. Stone columns rose from the cavern floor like the trunks of titanic trees. Strange crystalline structures embedded in the walls emitted a dim golden illumination. casting long shadows across the enormous hall. And across that hall, others were already waiting. The Dominion Council had assembled. They stood in a great semicircle facing the central platform, their bodies tall and powerful, their scaled forms shifting subtly as they studied the one who had just awakened. Some were older than the pyramids of Egypt. Some had watched the last ice age retreat from the northern continents. All of them carried the memory of a civilization that had survived extinction events that erased entire worlds. The one who had opened his eye was older than most of them. His name translated loosely into human language as Sathar Kel, the Keeper of Memory. Sathar Kel's gaze moved slowly across the chamber. Each council member returned the look with calm acknowledgement. Their communication did not depend entirely on speech. Much passed between them in subtle shifts of posture, eye movement, and the faint electrical signals that rippled along specialized sensory organs beneath their scales. Still, words were used when decisions carried weight, and tonight, the weight was immense. Sathar Kel finally spoke. The surface species has crossed another threshold. His voice moved through the chamber like distant thunder, measured, controlled, ancient. Across the council, another reptilian stepped forward. His frame was broader than most, his scales darker, his amber eyes sharp with analytical focus. "Confirmation has been verified," he said. The human scientist accessed one of the sealed artifacts. Sathar Kel's eye narrowed slightly. The fragment retrieved from the Alaskan drill. Yes. A quiet ripple of tension moved through the council. For thousands of years, the Dominion had hidden its oldest structures beneath layers of stone, tectonic movement, and deliberate concealment. The architecture was never meant to be discovered by surface species, yet now a human had touched one. Sathar Kel closed his eye briefly. Inside his mind, memory unfolded. He remembered a time when the surface world was ruled by enormous reptilian beasts that thundered across jungles and shallow seas. He remembered the sky turning black, the great burning, the extinction that followed. The Dominion had survived only because they had already moved beneath the crust of the planet. Their cities had become subterranean. Their civilization had evolved in darkness, and over the ages they had watched the surface recover. First plants, then mammals, then primates, then humans. At first the species had seemed fragile, temporary, but humans had one dangerous trait. They learned quickly. Sathar Kel opened his eye again. They are approaching technological parity faster than projected. Another council member spoke. Their orbital systems already scan portions of the crust. Primitive scans, another replied. For now. Silence filled the chamber again, because every member of the Dominion Council understood what came next. Sooner or later, humans would discover that the planet was not empty beneath its surface. And once that discovery happened, the age of secrecy would end. Sathar Kel's gaze moved slowly across the chamber. We must consider 3 outcomes. The council listened carefully. First, Sathar Kel said, the surface species discovers us gradually and reacts with fear. That scenario required little imagination. Humans had a long history of destroying what they feared. They will attempt to eradicate us. A few council members shifted slightly. They did not fear humans, but conflict with the surface species would destabilize the planet, and the Dominion had always preferred stability. Sathar Kel continued. Second possibility. They discover us and seek cooperation. This outcome was less predictable. Humans were capable of curiosity and alliance, but they were also capable of suspicion and war. The Dominion could not depend on human rationality. Then Sathar Kel spoke the third possibility. The surface species may already suspect. The chamber grew very quiet, because this scenario was the most dangerous of all. If humans had already begun forming theories about hidden civilizations beneath the planet, if those theories were spreading, then discovery might come far sooner than expected. One council member stepped forward. The observer Kareth has reported increasing human activity in the northern mountain regions. Sathar Kel listened carefully. The same region where the artifact was uncovered. Yes. Another council member added quietly, the human scientist is searching for answers. Sathar Kel considered this. One human, one accidental discovery. Normally that would not concern the Dominion. But sometimes history pivoted on individuals. Curiosity had started many revolutions. Sathar Kel spoke again. Then the protocol must begin. The words echoed softly through the chamber. Several council members shifted in acknowledgement. They had hoped this day would not come for many centuries. But the timeline had changed. Activate the Sentinel network, Sathar Kel said. Deep within the planet, systems older than human civilization stirred. Machines built during the earliest era of the Dominion, monitoring arrays, defensive systems, observation platforms hidden beneath oceans, deserts, and mountain ranges. Across the planet, dormant technology began to wake. Far above the chamber, the surface world remained peaceful. Humans slept. Cities glowed with quiet electric light. Cars moved along highways. People believed they understood their world. But far beneath their feet, an eye had opened, and that eye had been watching them for a very long time. Sathar Kel looked toward the ceiling of the cavern, though millions of tons of rock separated him from the sky. The surface species approaches awareness, he said quietly. And awareness always brings consequences. He paused. Then he delivered the command that would shape the future of both civilizations. Prepare the Dominion. Above the earth, in the quiet city archives, Dr. Marcus Vale had just realized something terrifying. The symbol on the artifact he had discovered was not decoration. It was a warning. Long before cities, long before steel and electricity, before roads, carved lines across continents and satellites circled the sky, humans lived in small circles of firelight. They slept beneath the open sky. They hunted in forests that seemed endless. And they believed the world above them was the only world that existed. They were wrong. High above a forest valley, a cave opened into the mountain. From inside that cave, the world looked peaceful. A small village rested beside a river that curved through the trees like a silver ribbon. Smoke rose gently from thatched roofs. Fires burned at the center of the settlement, their warm light flickering against wooden huts and woven shelters. Night had already fallen. The people below had gathered around their fires. Children slept beside their mothers. Hunters sharpened bone blades. Stories moved quietly through the village as elders spoke of spirits in the mountains and creatures that lived beyond the trees. They had no idea that one of those creatures was watching them. In the darkness of the cave, a massive silhouette remained perfectly still. The creature crouched near the entrance, its body blending with the shadows of the stone walls. The thick scales across its shoulders reflected almost no light, making it nearly invisible even if someone had looked directly toward the cave. But no one in the village looked up. Humans rarely do. The reptilian observer studied the small settlement below with quiet curiosity. His name was Kareth. Thousands of years earlier, his kind had been the masters of the surface world. But now they watched from the shadows. Because time had changed everything. The Dominion had learned an important lesson during the ancient catastrophes that reshaped the planet. Surface life was fragile. Civilizations built under open skies could vanish in a single generation. Asteroids, volcanic winters, ice ages. The Dominion had survived only because they moved underground before those disasters struck. Their cities had grown deeper, safer, hidden. And for millions of years they had allowed the surface to belong to whatever species happened to rise there. Now that species was human. And tonight, Kareth watched them carefully. The village fires flickered in the wind. A group of hunters sat near the edge of the settlement repairing spears. One of them stood suddenly. He turned his head slowly toward the mountains. Kareth noticed the movement instantly. For a moment the hunter simply stared into the darkness of the forest, as though listening to something only he could hear. Humans possessed instincts that modern civilization had dulled. Primitive awareness. A sense that sometimes warned them when something unseen was nearby. The hunter's eyes moved slowly toward the cliffs, toward the cave, toward the place where Kareth crouched in the shadows. Kareth remained perfectly still. Even his breathing slowed. For a long moment, the hunter stared toward the mountains. Then one of the other men laughed and spoke to him, breaking the tension. The hunter hesitated. Then he turned back to the fire. The moment passed. Kareth watched them for several more minutes. These humans were strong, resilient, adaptable. They would survive longer than most surface species. That much was already clear. But survival did not mean dominance. Kareth leaned forward slightly and studied the village more closely. The settlement was primitive. Wooden structures, animal skins, stone tools. But something about the humans intrigued him. Their firelight gatherings, their cooperation, their strange emotional bonds. The Dominion did not form families the way humans did. Dominion society was built on lineage, duty, and hierarchy. Humans built theirs on something else entirely: connection. It made them unpredictable, sometimes weak, sometimes remarkably strong. Behind Kareth, deep within the cave tunnel, another reptilian approached silently. This one was older. He paused a few steps behind the observer and looked past him toward the valley. "The mammals are multiplying," the older one said quietly. Kareth did not turn. "Yes." "They expand into every region of the surface." "Yes." The older reptilian studied the village for several moments. Then he said something that would echo across thousands of years of Dominion history. "One day, they may rule this world." Kareth considered that possibility. Humans were clever, but they were fragile. Their bodies were soft, their lifespans short, their societies unstable. Still, there was something unusual about them. Their curiosity, their determination, their strange ability to rebuild after disasters that would end other species completely. "They are young," Kareth said finally. The older reptilian nodded slowly. "Yes." The two observers watched the village fires burn lower. One by one, the humans disappeared into their huts. The night grew quieter. Mist began drifting through the valley. Above them, the stars filled the sky. Kareth's eyes moved across the heavens. The Dominion had mapped the stars long before humans learned to write. They understood the age of the universe, the scale of time, and the rarity of intelligence. That was why the Dominion had allowed the surface species to live. Even fragile civilizations deserved the chance to grow. But growth always carried risk. The older reptilian turned away from the cave entrance. "The Council will want a report." Kareth nodded slightly. "We will continue observing." For a moment longer he watched the sleeping village below. A faint smile touched the edge of his reptilian mouth. "They are curious creatures," he said quietly. Then he stepped back into the darkness of the cave, and the watchers of the mountains vanished again. Thousands of years passed. The village became ruins. The forest grew over the old settlement. Human civilizations rose and fell. Empires burned. Cities appeared where forests once stood. And slowly, very slowly, humanity began to ask questions about the world beneath their feet. Questions that would eventually lead to one man in an archive building, holding a fragment of ancient metal in his hands. A fragment that proved the Watchers had always been there. And now, for the first time since those ancient nights in the mountains, the Dominion was preparing to reveal itself, because the species they once watched from the shadows had grown powerful enough to find them. Human beings like to believe they are the center of history. It is an understandable mistake. Most civilizations measure time only across the span of their own existence. A few thousand years feels immense when your oldest monuments are younger than the forests around them. But the Earth keeps older records. Much older. Records written not in ink or language, but in stone, extinction, and survival. And those records tell a story humans have never truly understood. Deep beneath the crust of the planet, the Dominion had watched the rise of humanity with careful patience. At first, humans were nothing more than scattered tribes clustered around fires, small communities living by instinct and memory. They hunted, they gathered, they told stories about spirits in mountains and monsters beneath the ground. Sometimes those stories were closer to truth than they realized, because even in those early days, the Dominion was already there, watching, learning, waiting. From their hidden cities far below the surface, the reptilian civilization observed humanity through countless generations. They watched the first villages appear. They watched agriculture transform wandering tribes into permanent settlements. They watched the birth of cities, strange, fragile structures that gathered humans together in numbers never seen before. Kareth had watched it all. To the Dominion, time moved slowly. Human history unfolded like the brief flicker of a candle. Empires rose, empires collapsed. Yet the species endured, and with each passing century, something remarkable happened. Human intelligence accelerated. Tools became machines. Machines became systems. Systems became networks. Civilization began spreading across the surface of the planet like a web of glowing threads. Electric lights replaced firelight. Steel replaced stone. And the human species began constructing cities so large they could be seen from orbit. The Dominion had predicted growth, but not at this pace. In the deepest chamber of the Dominion Council, Sathar Kel studied a projection of the surface world. The display was unlike anything humans possessed. A living model of the Earth itself. Continents shimmered in layers of geological data. Ocean currents flowed in slow motion. And across the surface, thousands of human cities pulsed with light. The largest of them shone like stars. One of those cities rose from the eastern coast of North America, a forest of steel towers stretching into the sky. At its edge stood a familiar statue, an enormous figure holding a torch above the harbor. Sathar Kel observed it with quiet fascination. Symbols mattered deeply to humans. They built statues to represent ideals, freedom, hope, power. Yet even as humans celebrated those ideals, their civilization continued expanding into territories that had once been wild, into mountains, into oceans, into the very crust of the earth, and eventually into the Dominion's hidden world. Across the chamber, another council member spoke. The human scientist continues his investigation. Sathar Kel's amber eye shifted toward the speaker. Marcus Vale. Yes. The name had already entered the Dominion's records. One man among billions. Yet sometimes history pivoted around individuals. He has identified the symbol as a warning, the council member continued. Sathar Kel nodded slowly. The ancient serpent eye marking had been placed on sealed Dominion structures long before humans evolved. It meant one thing. Do not open. But humans rarely obey warnings when curiosity is involved. Sathar Kel turned his gaze back toward the projection of Earth. The surface species had reached a point where their curiosity could no longer be contained. They were scanning the crust of the planet with seismic imaging, drilling deeper into the mantle, mapping underground cavities. Soon they would discover the truth, that the Earth was not an empty shell beneath their cities, that entire civilizations existed in the darkness below. Kareth stood beside the council chamber entrance, watching the projection silently. His long observation of humanity had given him an unusual perspective among the Dominion. He had watched humans when they were primitive. Now he watched them command machines that circled the planet. He had seen them build civilizations from almost nothing. But he had also seen how fragile those civilizations could be. Humans possessed brilliance and chaos. Sometimes both at the same time. Sathar Kel spoke again. The question before the Dominion is no longer whether humans will discover us. The chamber grew quiet. That moment is inevitable. No one argued. The council had reached the same conclusion. Human curiosity had crossed the threshold of containment. Discovery would happen. The only question remaining was how the Dominion would respond. One council member spoke carefully. We could erase the evidence. It was technically possible. Dominion technology could collapse tunnels, destroy artifacts, seal ancient chambers permanently. But Sathar Kel shook his head. That would only delay the inevitable. Another council member suggested the darker alternative. We could eliminate the human scientist. Silence fell across the chamber. The Dominion had rarely interfered directly with the surface species. For millions of years they had maintained distance. Observation. Patience. But now the line between secrecy and survival was beginning to blur. Kareth stepped forward. There may be another path. The council turned toward him. Explain. Kareth studied the projection of Earth carefully. The humans have reached a stage where secrecy cannot last forever. Satharkel's eye narrowed slightly. You suggest revelation. Controlled revelation. A quiet murmur moved through the council. The idea was radical. For thousands of years, the Dominion had hidden from the surface species. But perhaps the time had come for a different strategy. Kareth continued. If humans discover us by accident, fear will guide their reaction. Satharkel understood the logic. Fear led to conflict. Conflict could destabilize the planet. But if the Dominion revealed themselves first, on their own terms, the outcome might be different, or it might be worse. The risk was enormous either way. Far above the chamber, the surface world continued its restless movement. Millions of humans lived their lives unaware of the debate unfolding beneath their feet. Traffic moved through city streets. Airplanes crossed oceans. Scientists studied the stars, and in a quiet office filled with scattered research notes, Dr. Marcus Vale stared at a diagram he had just completed. The serpent eye symbol. It appeared again and again in ancient structures discovered around the world. Different continents, different ages, but always the same mark, the same warning. And suddenly Marcus understood something terrifying. These structures were not isolated ruins. They were connected, part of a single system. A system that stretched beneath the entire planet. Marcus leaned back in his chair slowly. His hands trembled slightly. Because the conclusion forming in his mind felt impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The structures were too advanced, too widespread, too old. They could not belong to any known human civilization. Which meant only one thing. Humanity had never been alone on this planet. Far below the surface. Satharkel looked once more at the glowing projection of the Earth, and for the first time in millions of years, the Dominion faced a decision that could reshape the future of two civilizations. The Watchers of the hidden world were no longer certain they could remain hidden, because the species they once observed from the shadows was finally beginning to see them. From space, Earth looks peaceful, a blue sphere drifting quietly through darkness. Clouds spiral gently across the oceans. Continents glow faintly beneath the thin veil of atmosphere. At night, the surface becomes a constellation of human lights, cities, highways, networks of civilization stretching across the planet. To human eyes, it appears like a world fully understood, mapped, measured, claimed. But appearances can be deceiving, because far beneath those lights, hidden deep inside the crust of the planet, another civilization had been watching for millions of years. And now, that civilization was beginning to stir. From orbit, the eastern half of North America shimmered with human activity. Thousands of cities pulsed with electricity. Transportation networks moved like glowing veins. Satellites drifted silently overhead, scanning weather systems, mapping oceans, and studying the structure of the Earth itself. Human technology had become powerful, impressively so, but even now those satellites could not see what lay far beneath the planet's surface. The Dominion had designed it that way. Their cities existed in layers far below the reach of ordinary geological instruments, vast caverns carved into ancient stone, shielded by natural formations and technological cloaking systems that had been operating quietly for tens of thousands of years. From above, the planet looked empty. From below, it was anything but. Inside the Dominion's central observation chamber, Sathar Kel studied the living projection of Earth. The display was enormous. A sphere of shimmering light suspended in the center of the chamber, showing the planet in real time. Storm systems moved slowly across the oceans. Ocean currents flowed like glowing rivers beneath the surface. And across the continents, human civilizations sparkled like a network of stars. But Sathar Kel was not studying the cities. He was watching something else. Beneath the lights, beneath the continents, deep within the stone itself, a faint pattern of activity had begun appearing in the Dominion's monitoring systems. Small disturbances, subtle vibrations. Human drilling operations had begun reaching depths that had once been considered impossible, and more concerning still. Human scanning technology was improving rapidly. Seismic imaging, gravitational mapping, quantum subsurface sensors. Each year their instruments grew more precise. Each year they came closer to seeing what lay beneath the crust. The Dominion had always known this moment would eventually arrive, but they had expected it to come thousands of years in the future. Instead, humanity had accelerated. Kareth stood beside Sathar Kel, watching the projection carefully. His amber eyes moved slowly across the glowing network of human civilization. There were more of them now than ever before. Billions. Cities stacked with towers of glass and steel. Machines flying across oceans. Signals bouncing between satellites and ground stations. Human civilization had become loud, bright, restless. But beneath that restless expansion, the Dominion still controlled the deeper world. For now, Sathar Kel adjusted the projection. The surface lights dimmed slightly as deeper layers appeared. The crust of the Earth became semi-transparent. And suddenly, an entirely different network became visible. Ancient corridors, subterranean highways carved through bedrock, enormous cavern systems that stretched across continents, the hidden infrastructure of the Dominion, a civilization older than human memory, one that had been quietly expanding beneath the surface for millions of years. Kareth watched the ancient structures glow faintly on the projection. Humans believed their cities defined the planet. But compared to the Dominion's hidden architecture, human civilization occupied only the thinnest skin of the world. Sathar Kel spoke quietly. The Sentinel network is now active. Across the planet, thousands of ancient monitoring systems had awakened. Hidden sensors buried beneath oceans. Observation platforms beneath mountain ranges. Autonomous guardians protecting sealed Dominion structures. All of them watching. All of them waiting. For the moment humanity crossed the final threshold. Kareth focused on one particular region of the projection, a cluster of faint disturbances beneath the mountains of Alaska, the same region where Marcus Vale's artifact had been discovered. Human drilling activity had increased, and now something new had appeared. A human expedition team, scientists, engineers, equipment designed to probe deeper into the crust than ever before. Kareth studied the data carefully. They are approaching one of the sealed entrances. Sathar Kel nodded. Yes. The chamber grew quiet. For millions of years, the Dominion had remained hidden. Their greatest advantage had always been secrecy. But secrecy had limits. Eventually, curiosity always found its way through stone. Far above the planet, satellites continued their silent orbit. They watched storms, tracked climate patterns, measured the slow movements of tectonic plates. but none of them noticed the deeper signals now spreading quietly through the planet's interior. Signals traveling through ancient Dominion networks. Messages sent between cities buried beneath continents. Across the hidden civilization, something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in thousands of years, the Dominion was preparing to interact directly with the surface species. Kareth looked once more at the glowing surface of the Earth. Human civilization shimmered like a living organism, restless, curious, ambitious. They had climbed from primitive tribes around campfires to a planetary technological species in only a few thousand years. It was impressive, dangerous, and strangely beautiful. Sethar Kel's voice broke the silence. The human scientist will find the entrance. Kareth did not question the prediction. Marcus Vale had already followed the evidence farther than anyone before him. He was close. Very close. And when he does? Kareth asked. Sethar Kel studied the planet quietly. The lights of human civilization pulsed across the continents. The hidden cities of the Dominion glowed faintly beneath the crust. Two worlds sharing the same planet. Unaware of each other for millions of years. Until now. Sethar Kel finally answered. When that door opens... He paused. And for the first time since the Dominion had retreated beneath the earth, uncertainty touched the ancient leader's voice. The age of secrecy will end. High above the planet, the night side of Earth rotated slowly toward the dawn. Sunlight crept across the horizon. Clouds turned gold. Cities dimmed as the day began. Billions of humans woke to another ordinary morning. They drank coffee, checked their phones, went to work. They had no idea that their species stood at the edge of the greatest discovery in human history. Because somewhere beneath the mountains of Alaska, a drilling team had just reached something impossible. A wall of perfectly smooth metal buried deep inside the stone. And engraved into that metal surface was the same ancient symbol, the serpent eye, watching, waiting. The first sound was not an explosion. It was a hollow tone, a deep metallic resonance that echoed through the drill chamber like the ringing of a distant bell. The drilling rig shuddered and slowed. Engineers leaned over their consoles, staring at the readouts. "What did we hit?" one of them asked. No one answered immediately, because the sensors were reporting something impossible. The drill had not struck rock. It had struck metal. The chamber lay nearly 3 kilometers beneath the frozen mountains of Alaska. Floodlights illuminated the narrow drilling corridor. Steel braces lined the walls. Cables ran across the ceiling like tangled veins. The air smelled of oil and stone dust. Dr. Marcus Vale stood near the edge of the platform, staring down at the drill shaft. His heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. He had followed the evidence across continents, ancient symbols, hidden structures, patterns buried deep beneath the crust of the planet. Now the evidence had led him here, and the Earth itself had just answered. A technician wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the monitor again. "It's not just metal," he said quietly. Marcus turned. "What do you mean?" The technician zoomed in on the imaging scan. The shape beneath the drill was enormous. Not a random plate, not debris. A wall, smooth, curving, extending far beyond the limits of the scanner. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest, because engraved into that metal surface was the same symbol he had seen on the artifact, the serpent eye, watching, waiting. The drilling rig shut down completely. Silence filled the underground chamber. Then someone whispered the thought no one wanted to say aloud. What if it's a door? Marcus didn't answer, but deep inside he already knew. Far below the drilling site, deep within the ancient corridors of the Dominion, a signal spread through the Sentinel network. The seal had been breached. The outer barrier had been located. The surface species had arrived. In the council chamber, Sathar Kel watched the alert appear across the projection of Earth. A single glowing point beneath the Alaskan mountains. The moment had come. Millions of years of secrecy had ended with a single strike of a human drill. Across the chamber, the council members stood in silence. The surface species had opened the door. Now the Dominion had to decide what stepped through it. Back in the drilling chamber, the engineers had cleared away the remaining stone. The object beneath the drill was now fully exposed. A massive circular structure embedded in the rock. Perfectly smooth, perfectly intact. No corrosion and no damage. As though it had been waiting there since the beginning of time. Marcus stepped forward slowly. His flashlight beam moved across the metal surface and stopped. The serpent eye symbol glowed faintly where the drill had scratched the outer layer. Marcus whispered the realization aloud. It wasn't buried. The engineers looked at him. What do you mean? Marcus swallowed. It was sealed. Then the door moved, not violently and not dramatically. Just a soft mechanical shift. A sound so quiet it almost seemed imagined. The circular structure separated along a thin seam. A faint line of darkness appeared. Cold air drifted upward from the opening. Air that had not touched the surface world in thousands of years. The engineers stepped back instinctively. Marcus did not. He could not. Every question that had driven his life had led to this moment. The door slowly widened, and the darkness beyond began to move. At first, the shapes were only shadows, tall silhouettes emerging from the depths. Their forms moved slowly, deliberately, not rushing, not hiding, just stepping forward from the ancient corridor beneath the earth. The floodlights illuminated them gradually. Scaled skin, broad shoulders. Amber eyes reflecting the artificial light. Reptilian faces that carried an intelligence far older than human civilization. Marcus felt the room spin slightly, because the impossible had just become real. Humanity was not alone on Earth, and they never had been. The Dominion observers stepped fully into the chamber. There were 6 of them. Massive figures cloaked in darkness, their presence filling the space with an almost physical gravity. The engineers backed away slowly. Some of them whispered prayers. Others simply stared in stunned silence. Marcus remained where he stood, because someone had to speak first. The tallest of the reptilian figures stepped forward. His scales were darker than the others, his eyes older. This was Kareth, the observer who had watched humanity since its earliest villages. Now he stood face to face with one of its scientists. For a long moment, neither species spoke. 2 civilizations separated by millions of years of hidden history, standing only a few meters apart. Finally, Kareth spoke. His voice was deep, measured, strangely calm. You have come far, Dr. Marcus Vale. Marcus blinked. You know my name? Kareth tilted his head slightly. We have watched your species for a very long time. The engineers stared in shock. The implications crashed into them all at once. They were not explorers. They were the discovered. Marcus found his voice again. How long? Kareth's amber eyes reflected the harsh white floodlights. Long before your species built its first cities. The words settled heavily in the air. Marcus thought of every myth, every ancient story about creatures beneath the earth, every legend dismissed as imagination. How many of you are there? Marcus asked quietly. Kareth paused. Then he gave the only honest answer. Enough. Silence returned, but this time it was different. No longer filled with fear, now it was filled with possibility. Because humanity had just opened the door to a hidden world older than their own, and no one knew what would come next. Far below, Satharkel watched the encounter through the Dominion network. The age of secrecy had ended. Two civilizations now shared knowledge of each other's existence. What came next would determine the fate of the planet itself. Conflict, coexistence, or something entirely new. Back in the chamber, Marcus looked at Kareth. For the first time in human history, a man was speaking to the watchers beneath the earth. Marcus asked the question that had haunted him since the moment he found the artifact. Why did you stay hidden? Kareth's gaze drifted briefly toward the surface above them, toward the world of cities and satellites and restless human curiosity. Then he answered. We were waiting. Marcus felt the weight of those words. Waiting for what? Kareth looked directly into his eyes. For you to find us. And far above the mountains, the earth continued its slow rotation beneath the stars. Human cities glittered across the continents. Beneath them, the hidden cities of the Dominion awakened. Two civilizations. One planet. And a future that had suddenly become far more complicated than either of them had imagined. The door had opened, and the story of Earth was only just beginning.